Pray with me. Loving God, it is our prayer today that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts would be acceptable to you. For you remain our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Mary's song. Mary's song. That's how Mary reacted to the good news brought to her by the angel Gabriel. She sang. She sang, "Joy to the world, all the boys and girls. Joy to the world." She sang. She sang, "Everything's coming up roses." She sang, "Let it go, let it go." She sang her happy song. But before she sang, she went with haste to the Judean town in the hill country. Mary was so astonished by this news from the angel that she headed for the hills to see if it was really true. This business from the angel about her cousin Elizabeth, was she really pregnant in her old age? Well, Mary got there and, yep, great with child. Or at least I imagine that's how she was feeling, great with child. Which I imagine is how one might feel who is in her 6th month. Especially after that whole baby leaping in the womb thing. I can't be sure, but I imagine that such baby leaping would make one feel great with child. That was when Mary looked at Elizabeth, 70 years old, great with child, and it finally sank in. This is a thing. This is happening. Mazel tov. And that was when Mary could no longer contain herself, and Mary sang. And don't you think that as Mary sang, she danced a little bit too? Have you ever received news good enough to make you want to dance? Have you ever found something out that just made your whole body want to move? Your husband's deployment is going to end just before Christmas. Your basement didn't flood this time. The tumor is benign. Go ahead and look up Happy Dance on your phone. Which one of those gifts is you? Is it more Charlie Brown Christmas? Or more End Zone Celebration? Is it Tempo de Valse? Or more Dad? Or maybe more of a floss? Either way, sometimes the news is so good, you just gotta dance. And that's what I figure Mary did, because Mary was really happy. She may have been a little scared too, but as biblical sources lead us to believe, she was very happy. She believed that angel. She was the first disciple, Mary was, for Luke. She was the model disciple for Luke. And she was the one who heard the good news, believed the good news, and then proclaimed the good news. Long before Peter or Andrew or James. Imagine this great religious tradition we have, this Christianity of ours, having as its linchpin the one moment when someone came to believe, and having that someone be a woman, a dancing, singing, believing, proclaiming woman, and then an enduring, suffering, grieving mother as our model, our prototype for what it means to follow Jesus, for what it means to lead in Jesus' name. Mary. Would that the church have kept women in such an exalted place throughout its history, right? Would that there might be a St. Mary's Basilica in Rome. But with the exception of very few important leaders, women haven't been allowed to do what Mary did. Women have not been allowed to sing their song or dance their dance or tell their truth nearly often enough as leaders in the church and elsewhere. A pastor friend of mine told me a story a few years ago about the church from even a few more years ago. The story was about a woman in his first church where he served as the youth and children's pastor, not an unusual assignment for someone's first congregation. Her name was Emily. And one day, Emily invited him to lunch. Now, it's not unusual for the new pastor to be invited to lunch by someone in the church. But my friend was young in ministry and spent all of his time with the children and the youth. Emily, on the other hand, was in her 90s. So my friend was a little intrigued. He went to have lunch with Emily and her daughter. He accepted this formal invitation. The two of them lived in a 4-room bungalow downtown, modest, a little cramped. Emily's daughter greeted him at the door and led him back to the kitchen through 2 rooms that were overstuffed with books, kind of a pathway there. Emily was sitting in the kitchen around the formica table. Emily's daughter guided his hand to hers because even though Emily wore heavy glasses she could no longer see, he grabbed her hand gently, aware of how very fragile and tender it was. A bird's hand. He sat. They ate. And after the dishes were cleared away by Emily's daughter, they got to the point of the invitation. "You, sir," she said, "are an author." He wasn't quite sure how she had found this out about him. He had done almost all of his writing after hours at home and at night, once the kids were in bed. And he didn't really want people to know that he was a writer, that his first passion wasn't ministry, but writing. He didn't want them to think that writing was going to be a distraction for his more formal work of spending time with the children and the youth. Somehow, she had found out. "You, sir, are an author, and I myself have published a book, a small book. So I am an author like you, and today I offer myself to you as a mentor, if you wish, and if you accept." He did, and he did. So my friend began visiting Emily, ushered each time into the house by her daughter and back into the kitchen where Emily held court. And as she mentored my friend, gradually her story spilled out. From childhood, Emily was compelled to write. It was who she was. As a child, her writing was tolerated as a curious habit, but then she grew up. Then she married, and then she became the wife of a principal of a very austere parochial school. Then she had children. In Emily's day, writing was tolerated among students and sometimes preachers. But creative writing was a frivolity, a vanity of sorts, for good church women married to good church men. So Emily wrote whenever she could in a way that no one else could see. This is the story Emily told my friend. She wrote because she couldn't not write. She even wrote a book, one book, a small book. And when that little book was done, she wrapped up the manuscript in brown paper and went to the post office in the next town to mail it to the only publisher she knew about. And after a long wait, a thin letter came in the mail. Emily brought the letter carefully into the house, waited until she was alone, took the letter into her crowded dining room, slit the envelope, unfolded the single sheet of paper. There were 3 lines of print on the letter, but the only word Emily saw that first time she read the letter was the one word, congratulations. Congratulations. I was so delighted, Emily told my friend. I put my hands on top of my head to keep it from exploding. I laughed out loud. I twirled around the dining room like a child. My skirt ballooned up. My arms went up. My hair flew backward. I cried for joy to God in heaven, and I danced. I danced. Oh, how I danced that day. But before she danced, her joy on that day, Emily told my friend, she went to the window and drew the drapes closed. The community could not see such joy in her. The community would immediately not understand and perhaps even despise what they could not understand. Something's amiss with the principal's wife. Did you see her dancing? Emily eventually told my friend, I offer myself to you as your mentor because you should never be sentenced to dance in the dark. People of God, for too long we have sentenced those whose gifts, whose very being do not fit into our easy categories to dance their lives in the dark. For too long we have read the story of Mary while keeping her descendants, her sisters, and her brothers in rooms with closed curtains. How lucky are we to be living in a time when we as a church and even as a people are taking our very first baby steps towards welcoming the dance of all people. There are too many Emilys in our collective past to count, but God knows who they are. God knows them and sees them and chooses them. And we honor them, even as we honor Mary, the first disciple, by embracing their joy and beholding their dance. How can each of us here today encourage those who, for far too long, have had to dance in the dark? Perhaps we can begin by listening to Mary's song one more time.
Oh.